Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
Brainjacking, the science of influence and manipulation. This book explores the psychology of storytelling, the ability to make that makes us human. Delighted to say that welcoming back on the show is the author of Brainjacking, Brian Clegg. Brian, good morning to you.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. Brainjacking, for those who don't know, what exactly is it?
I must admit it's a term I've made up, but essentially what we're looking at is the ability to change other people's brains through the use of things like informing them, influencing them, manipulating them. And the medium for doing that is storytelling in all its forms, not just, a novel or a spoken story, but everything from film and video to the internet.
Well, when we're looking at brainjacking, though, is this a thing that can happen straight away, or is this a procedure that takes time?
It can certainly be very quick. As I say, what we're talking about is the ability to change the way somebody else thinks. And it may be that it's literally just you hear something and you think, oh, yeah, I'll see the world a bit differently. Or it could change your attitude. It could change your actions. And sometimes it's for good. There's lots of stuff where brainjacking is very good, very useful. At other times, whether we're talking about propaganda, misinformation, the use perhaps of social media in some ways, it can be not necessarily for the good. But the fact is we're always changing other people's brains, and this is looking at how we do it.
So we're looking at, you said there are three ways that people influence, if you like: informing, influencing, and manipulating. Presumably in a pre-social media world or era, this was done more insidiously.
It depends what he means by insidiously. We have always attempted to influence other people. If you think of something like advertising, which is something I look at in the book, it goes back certainly at least to Roman times. And a lot of early advertising was more about informing. But later on, the other aspects of it start to come in when you're trying to say, buy my product rather than somebody else's. And the distinction I make, incidentally, between these three things is informing is, if you like, neutral information. So this is something you didn't know, useful to know. Influencing is typically a rational argument. So I'll persuade you through rational argument to change your approach. And manipulating, which doesn't have to be bad. These days, it tends to have a negative connotation. But manipulating is where we bring in an emotional argument, effectively. So we change somebody's mind through the use of emotion.
So people might think that this is a recent phenomenon, but we're going all the way back. Past Mad Men type of the original advertising of the 50s and 60s, and we're going back to Roman times. What is a Roman example then of influencing?
Well, literally, in terms of influencing, obviously, this is as long as we've been able to speak to each other, we have been doing brainjacking. That's what our communication with each other is all about, really. It's about informing, influencing, manipulating. But in terms of, I was specifically thinking of advertising. We know that the Romans used advertising. In fact, at Pompeii, there's actually a wall advert for some kind of I think perfume, something of that ilk. And equally, the Romans used bushes as an indication of a wine shop. So that's the informing aspect of advertising. Here we are, we're selling wine, and you can tell because there's a bush outside the shop. Right.
Okay. Fair enough. The things, I suppose, as technology develops, you've got things like the invention of the printing press. You've got the pamphleteering that's happening in the coffee houses in London in the 18th century. Those again are maybe examples of brainjacking.
Absolutely. All advertising is attempting to do some form of brainjacking. We're not talking about a small thing. This is arguably what's at the center of being human. We're always influencing, manipulating, informing other people. But it really comes into its own, particularly in terms of manipulating, I'd suggest, with the sort of quack medicines of the 19th century. The most famous one probably is Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound, made famous indirectly by the Lily the Pink song from the Scaffold. This was a real thing, and she was one of the first people to really use advertising in a very emotional way. So she used her own image, to make us think, oh, this is from this nice little old lady. And she also said to the women she was selling to, because primarily it was sold as something to deal with women's problems, as they called it.
Yes.
I would say to them, you write to me and I'll write back to you and I'll give you advice. And in a sense, it was the precursor of a social media influencer. What she was doing is giving them advice, and this was all based around the idea of selling her product.
Presumably, one of the things behind this is that you influence or you suggest to a person in a way that makes them feel good about themselves, in a way that they think that they've made the decision, the choice themselves.
That's certainly true when we come on to this emotional side, the manipulating side. If we're using a straightforward, rational argument, I can show to you that you can make more money by using this piece of technology. Here's a demonstration of this, this, and this. That's not quite the same, but certainly once we get into the emotional side, a lot of it is about making you feel good. Not always, though. I mean, if you look at the way that charities advertise these days, they will use sob stories effectively. That this little girl is going without this, and with your help, she will feel a lot better. So it's tying into our emotions, but it's not always positive emotions. It can be negative as well. I think a brilliant example actually is the Mr. Bates versus the Post Office TV show. So I don't know if you're familiar with this. There's a big scandal in the UK over the use of a system that resulted in many sub-postmasters being charged with fraud. This computer system was wrong. Now, for decades, newspapers had mentioned this. There'd been documentaries about it. There'd been a BBC radio series about it, and it made no impact. But a TV drama about it actually made change because it had that emotional connection, because you actually saw the people suffering. Oh, they weren't real people, they were actors, so it was definitely manipulative. In fact, I'd go as far as to say it was propaganda, probably you could call it. But the fact is it worked in a way that the rational influence attempts didn't work.
It's something that pulls on the heartstrings when you mention, those adverts that you see, so and so has to walk 5 miles a day to get fresh water, or that you see people sort of suffering. It may, a documentary by a journalistic team might not have the same dramatic effect, but a TV series absolutely will, because they can heighten the drama and the emotional pull.
That's right. The documentaries would have resulted in interviews, but that's somebody talking about their experience. In the drama, you see the experience. You experience it yourself indirectly in a way that you can't just from somebody talking about something. So it takes it to the next level. It takes the ability to manipulate to the next level when we get things like video, TV, films over and above just the spoken word.
And we talk about taking things to the next level. Well, I mean, social media, artificial intelligence, etc. have turbocharged this surely to the next level.
Yes, certainly. I mean, one of the things I do look at in the book is some of the claims are frankly exaggerated, for instance, in terms of some aspects of the impact of social media. But there's no doubt that social media influencers, as I say, are doing exactly the same thing as Lydia Pinkham was in terms of trying to establish this relationship as if this is somebody you know, so somebody who gives you advice, and that it's made stronger because of the video aspect of it. And it's quite possible with the next generation of AI that this could go even further. So there's some talk that with AI in the future, it'll be possible effectively to have a social media influencer that you can interact with directly. So they're not just talking to you, but you can have a conversation with them.
So what are you hoping that people are going to learn to gather from your book, Brainjacking?
Well, I think it's partly, this is, to me, and it's not just me, I've got some professors quoted in the book who are saying, this is very much about what makes us human. It's not something we can separate ourselves from. It's about what we are as people. How we're different from other animals, frankly, is the way we can do this. And the reality is, it's partly understanding that, but also being able to some extent to counter, hopefully, some of the negative aspects, like what can you do about misinformation, disinformation, that kind of thing.
And presumably, there has to be a part of it. It would be very easy to write something like this or to have a study like this and just say, well, we're all doomed. And basically, we're going to be, just hitting buttons for the likes and the endorphin rush and whatever. But there are, as you said, with the dramatization of Mr. Bates versus the post office, this can be the way that you appeal to people, can be engineered. So it's a force for, if you like, positive action.
Well, that's right. And I'd also say that something that has come across repeatedly in the book is that some of the ways that we think people are able to brainjack us actually prove to be a lot less significant than they really are. So one example of that is subliminal advertising. This idea that you can sort of flash up an image so quickly that people don't really take it in. During a film they're watching or a video or whatever, and this will influence them in some way. And this is, has been a major theme as something that's really nasty and horrible since the 1950s, when somebody originally published something about this. Unfortunately, what wasn't widely realized is the guy publishing it, somebody called James Vickery, was basically somebody who sold marketing. He made the whole thing up. The supposed experiment that was first done never happened. Now, there have been studies into it since. There's a very small effect, but actually it's far less likely to have an influence than the kind of things where we are conscious of it. The subliminal side, apart from in certain things like hypnotism, is actually really quite minor.
And throughout history, is there an example that you can pick out that you think is one of the more sort of standout examples of how we've been influenced, engineered, or generally probably towards a product or a theory?
Yeah, I mean, you can see it happening all the time, actually. And I'm afraid one thing I do pick up is that university press releases are amongst the strongest examples of this, that they are always making claims that are really quite way beyond what the original scientists were claiming, because obviously the university wants money. And the trouble with that is, perhaps, dare I say, slightly lazy journalists have a tendency to pick up on these press releases. So you will see in the next day's newspapers interesting stories about these amazing new things, or the fact that, this causes cancer or this doesn't cause cancer, or in the case of certain newspapers, both at the same time, quite probably. And the reality is that often these studies are incomplete. They're not sufficiently detailed, or they're not really doing what's involved. And my favorite, which isn't actually a major thing in terms of impact, is back in 2013, you saw headlines saying that scientists finally create real lightsaber. I love that finally, by the way, as these scientists have been sitting around.
Well, exactly.
Not doing anything.
That's kind of what you need, isn't it, basically? I've been waiting for that for ages.
Absolutely. And what it turned out to be the case, actually, was this experiment involved two photons of light, so tiny particles of light, very briefly interacting with each other in a special substance that is near absolute zero cold. So it is absolutely nothing to do with lightsabers, but somebody picked up on the idea, well, light would kind of have to interact with each other to make a lightsaber, wouldn't it? So, and it got inflated to the stage that even, quite sensible newspapers were carrying that kind of headline. And I think sometimes we do have to be a little bit careful about exactly where the information is coming from. Okay, university, good, but also how that relates to what's actually behind the story. What actually happened? What is the truth behind it, rather than how is it being sold?
The book is called Brainjacking, The Science of Influence and Manipulation. It's by Brian Clegg, who we're speaking to today. Brian, I know you've done a few books in your time, to put it mildly. So where can people find you? Where can people find you online?
Okay, easiest way is my website, which is Brian Clegg, BrianClegg.net, brianclegg.net.
And you'll be able to order the book as well via our own virtual bookstore. The book is called Brainjacking, The Science of Influence and Manipulation. It's by Brian Clegg, who we're speaking to today. Brian, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.